So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zachary Garcia. Today I'm going to be discussing DiRA, discriminative, restorative, and adversarial learning for self-supervised medical image analysis. The authors listed below did this research in affiliation with Arizona State University and the Mayo Clinic. So to start off, the problem statement presented by the authors is that discriminative, restorative, and adversarial methods for pre-training networks may show synergistic effects if they're combined into one architecture, and that these synergistic effects need to be studied because nobody has combined these methods into one architecture before. Another problem that the authors bring up is that medical images frequently don't contain the variable backgrounds and the additional contextual information that you get from photographic images. And because of this, more attention needs to be given to extracting the fine-grained details that are present in medical images. And so with DiRA's combined use of these three self-supervised learning techniques, um, the authors may be able to provide benefit in the medical image domain by capturing both the high-level features present in images, along with the fine-grained details present in the image. So some prior works that were examined by the authors include discriminative self-supervised learning techniques. Within these techniques, there's class level discrimination methods and then instance level discrimination methods. So with class level discrimination methods, input data is assigned a pseudo label. And the data set is clustered into similar pseudo classes. With instance level discrimination methods, the network attempts to maximize the similarity and extracted features between an image and then an augmented version of that same image. Additionally, the authors examined pre-existing restorative and adversarial techniques. These include the pretext tasks of colorization, end painting, and then denoising. And then also there's been a wide number of research papers that have examined self-supervised methods for medical imaging specifically. And some of these include contrastive and restorative self-supervised methods. And these methods are especially important to develop in the medical image domain because there's frequently a shortage of annotated data. And so moving on, the motivation by the authors for the authors' research is these three different self-supervised pre-training techniques have already yielded good results, but nobody has studied any potential synergistic effects when they're combined into one architecture. So the authors seek to answer the question of whether these can be combined and provide a more robust pre-training solution for medical imaging. So the main contributions of this research is that the DIRA framework was able to demonstrate a synergistic effect by combining discriminative, restorative, and adversarial pre-training techniques. And with this framework, they were able to improve upon the current state of the art for self-supervised pre-training and medical image processing. With DIRA, rather than provide a fixed architecture, they provide a general framework for how to combine these three different methods. So a number of pre-existing discriminative, restorative, and adversarial methods can be combined together following the DIRA framework. And with this framework, it enables the network to better capture high-level details while still capturing the fine-grained details that are necessary to capture in the medical imaging domain. So to outline the author's approach, they propose DiRA as a framework that combines these three self-supervised learning techniques. During their experimentation, they adapt the MoCo V2, Barlow twins, and SimSciM contrastive learning architectures. And these are adapted to fit within DiRA's discriminative learning branch. Additionally, for 3D medical imaging tasks, the authors adapt the TransVW architecture to fit within the DiRA framework. And since TransVW already contains contrastive and then restorative methods, the authors only add in an adversarial component to the TransVW architecture. And so with these various DiRA adapted networks, a number of experiments are conducted by the authors, and they compare performance across 9 different downstream tasks. So to give an overview of the DiRA architecture, there's 3 different branches. There's the discriminative, restorative, and adversarial branch of the network. Within the discriminative branch, there's 2 encoder and then projector layers. And these take inputs from 2 different input crops in attempts to maximize the similarity between the features extracted from these image crops. Within the restorative branch, you have a single input that's augmented. And then the encoder and decoder present in the restorative branch attempts to reconstruct the image back to its original form. And then within the adversarial branch, adversarial loss is calculated to distinguish between the original image and the reconstructed image, which is used to further improve training of the restorative branch. And so with the DiRA framework, the authors utilize a joint training strategy. So loss is calculated individually for each of the DiRA branches. And then there are hyperparameters associated with each branch that weight the importance of the loss value coming from that branch. And with this joint training strategy, the authors argue that the discriminative branch is able to capture high-level features, while the restorative branch is able to capture some of the more fine-grained details present within these images. And then the addition of the adversarial loss onto this further helps the restorative branch accurately capture those fine-grained details. So the author's implementation for their experiments, they adapt the 3 pre-existing contrastive learning architectures and use these adaptations to perform a series of 2D downstream tasks. For all 3 of these adaptations, the authors use a 2D UNet with a ResNet 50 backbone in the restorative portion of the network. And then for the 3D medical imaging experiments, the authors adapt the TransVW network. And this TransVW network was actually proposed by these same authors in an earlier paper. TransVW consists of a classification head and clusters the input samples into different classes. Along with that, it includes a restorative branch. And so to adapt this network to DiRA, the authors only needed to add in the adversarial component to this network. And so moving on, the authors conducted a very wide range of experiments in this paper. Models were pre-trained using the original unmodified architectures and then the DiRA adapted versions of those architectures. And they were tested with a total of 9 different downstream tasks. For the 2D downstream tasks, the chest X-ray 14, Chexpert, SIM ACR, and NIH Montgomery data sets were used. And then for 3D tasks, the authors used Luna, PECAD, LIDC, IDRI, LITS, and BRATS. In these various data sets, they included the downstream tasks of classification, segmentation, and then in one experiment, they even did localization. And then along with that, these data sets are also designed to model typical challenges that are faced in the medical imaging domain, such as imbalanced data set, limited data set size, and then small scan areas. And then to compare performance across their different experiments, they calculated area under the ROC curve for classification performance, dice coefficient for segmentation performance, and then intersection over union for localization performance. So for experiment one, the authors took the 3 contrastive learning architectures and then their DiRA adaptations of those architectures. And they performed 2 disease classification tasks and 2 segmentation tasks on 2D data. And for all of these different tasks, the DiRA adaptations of the networks performed better. Moving on to experiment 2, the authors wanted to test DiRA in data constrained environments. And so the way they did this is they took 1%, 25%, and then 50% of the available training data in 3 of the 2D data sets. And with the DiRA adapted networks, pre-training was improved significantly, and much better performance was seen in the downstream tasks. And with the Barlow twins adaptation in particular, there was much less significant of a performance gain, but still a slight performance gain with the DiRA adaptation. Moving on to experiment 3, the authors conducted a disease classification and localization on the chest X-ray 14 data set. And so the way they did this with the original and adapted networks is they used GradCam to generate heat maps of the feature extractions. And then they performed a binarization on these heat maps to get an area for use in the IOU calculation. And so with the DiRA adaptations of these 3 architectures, very significant IOU score increases were seen. Moving on to experiment 4, the authors wanted to determine how DiRA performs against fully supervised pre-training methods. And so they trained 2 baseline models with the ImageNet and chest X-ray 14 data sets. And then moved on to their fully or their self-supervised pre-training with the DiRA networks. And so with the self-supervised DiRA pre-training, the authors were able to at least match or in some cases improve upon the fully supervised pre-training. Moving on to experiment 5, the authors tested DiRA on 5 3D medical imaging downstream tasks, and they evaluated the DiRA trans-VW adaptation against the original trans-VW architecture. For 4 out of 5 of these tasks, the DiRA adaptation performed better. And then the authors also included an ablation study. And for this ablation study, they took the MoCo V2 Barlow twins and SimSciAm DiRA adaptations. And initially, they performed pre-training just using the discriminative loss. And then they added on the restorative loss, and then finally used all 3 loss values in pre-training. And as each of these branches of DiRA was added on to pre-training, network performance was increased. So with their wide range of experiments, the authors reached a number of different conclusions. For the first experiment, the authors concluded that the existing discriminative network architectures can be adapted to better capture fine-grained information by fitting them within the DiRA framework. For experiment 2, the authors were able to show that DiRA provides a more robust self-supervised learning method when there's a limited amount of annotated data. And then for experiment 3, the authors showed that the fine-grained details that DiRA captures improve weakly supervised localization. In their 4th experiment, the authors were able to show that DiRA provides more generic feature extraction than the fully supervised baseline models. And this makes it better suited to a wider variety of medical imaging tasks. And then again, in experiment 5, they were able to show that DiRA extracts a diverse feature set and can improve performance across a variety of downstream tasks. And then the authors' ablation study just further reinforces their claim that these 3 self-supervised methods have a synergistic effect when they're combined into one architecture. So the strengths that I thought were present in this paper was that a very thorough set of experiments was developed. And with this wide range of experiments, the authors very well demonstrated DiRA's advantages and demonstrated that it's adaptable to a very wide variety of use cases. Along with that, due to DiRA's design and the fact that it's just a general framework laid out by the authors, a number of different pre-existing contrastive and restorative architectures can be fit within DiRA's framework. The single weakness that I thought was present in this paper was that the DiRA framework is only a slight modification over the author's previous research on trans-VW. Trans-VW is already combining discriminative learning with restorative learning techniques. And so for the author's adaptation of this network, the only addition needed was an adversarial discriminator. Because of this, the DiRA framework may lack some novelty over the original trans-VW research. And then, so for the overall rating for this paper, I would assign this paper a 2. The set of experiments that was included in the research was very thorough, and it adequately demonstrated that DiRA can be effective across a wide range of medical imaging tasks. Along with that, there's many possible variations of the DiRA framework, and the authors did an exceptional job of including many of these possible variations. And even though the trans-VW network is very similar to the DiRA architecture, this research on the DiRA architecture provides critical follow-up research that goes beyond what was presented by the authors in trans-VW. And it showed the powerful performance gains with adapting these networks to the DiRA architecture. Some future directions that I thought the authors could take this research is that the authors very thoroughly demonstrated DiRA's effectiveness in the medical imaging domain. But I would be curious if the same type of performance gains can be seen outside of the medical imaging domain. And then additionally, in the conclusion and discussion section, the authors mentioned that even further optimization can be conducted on the collaborative learning strategy. And this is due to just the wide range of ways you can pair up the discriminative methods and restorative methods. But further experimentation on different combinations could lead to further performance gains. And that's about all I have. This is a list of the references, and thank you everyone for listening.